The honest answer is no. Flight 12 alone will not save SpaceX's moon mission. But that is not the whole answer, because Flight 12 is not trying to save it. Flight 12 is trying to begin saving it. And whether the distinction matters depends entirely on how fast the next 8 flights go, and whether SpaceX can do in 18 months what it has been unable to do in the previous 36. Let me explain exactly what Flight 12 is, exactly what it is not, and exactly what the gap between those two things means for whether American astronauts land on the moon in 2028, or whether that date slips into the kind of permanent ambiguity that has defined the Artemis program's relationship with its own timelines since the beginning. Start with the statement that Tom Percy, NASA's HLS systems engineering and integration manager at Marshall Space Flight Center, made to Spaceflight Now just before the Artemis II launch in April. He said that the first propellant transfer flight is going to be really important to us for SpaceX, and we expect to see that and get some real great data from it. Read that carefully. Not the first flight, the first propellant transfer flight. Percy is not talking about Flight 12. He is talking about a flight that has not been scheduled yet, a flight that comes after Flight 12, a flight that depends on Flight 12 succeeding first. And that propellant transfer flight, the one Percy is waiting for, is the most critical undemonstrated milestone in the entire Artemis architecture. It has been the most critical undemonstrated milestone since Jim Free, NASA's Chief of Exploration Systems Development, said in June 2023 that the Starship HLS critical design review would be delayed until SpaceX completed an orbital refueling demonstration. 3 years later, as of May 2026, neither the demonstration nor the critical design review has occurred. That is the gap Flight 12 needs to begin closing, with functional propellant transfer hardware connecting them, transferring cryogenic liquid oxygen and methane from a tanker vehicle's tanks into a receiver vehicle's tanks, in microgravity, with the thermodynamic challenges of cryogenic fluid behavior in zero-G producing boil-off losses that have never been precisely characterized at this scale. The SpaceX internal timeline, which Politico obtained in late 2025, targeted June 2026 for the first orbital refueling demonstration. That was before Flight 12 had a confirmed launch date in May. The June 2026 target now appears to be optimistic, given that Flight 12, which is a prerequisite for any orbital campaign, has not yet flown. The more realistic estimate from independent analysts puts the first orbital refueling demonstration somewhere in late 2026 or early 2027. From refueling demonstration to critical design review to human rating certification to Artemis III Earth orbit rendezvous is a sequence of milestones with hard dependencies. Each one must complete before the next can begin. Now, here is what Flight 12 actually contributes to that sequence. And it is not nothing, it is significant, but it is not sufficient. Flight 12 carries Ship 39, the first V3 Starship upper stage, with integrated propellant transfer hardware installed as a standard production feature, not as a retrofit, not as a modification. As part of the basic vehicle, the hardware has to survive a real flight. Launch loads, stage separation dynamics, the thermal environment of the upper atmosphere, the vacuum of space, and eventually re-entry heating, before anyone can rely on it for a docking and transfer operation. Flight 12 produces the first real-world data on whether the transfer hardware survives flight intact and functions correctly in the actual space environment. That data does not exist yet. Without it, the orbital refueling campaign that follows cannot be designed with confidence. Flight 12 also produces real propulsion data on Raptor 3 in flight, data that matters specifically for the HLS program, because the GAO identified Raptor engine development as a top risk for the Artemis timeline in their November 2023 report. 33 Raptor 3 engines fire simultaneously in actual flight conditions, at full thrust, through max Q, through stage separation, through booster entry and landing. This is the first time these engines face the real aerodynamic and thermal loads of flight. Any anomaly that appears in that data either narrows or widens the gap between where SpaceX currently is and where the HLS certification process needs it to be. And Flight 12 validates Pad 2. For SpaceX's stated goal of bi-weekly Starship launch cadence in support of the propellant transfer campaign, and a stretch goal of weekly launches using both pads, Pad 2 has to work. A failed Pad 2 infrastructure element on Flight 12 that requires weeks or months to repair would push the propellant transfer demonstration further into 2027 and put the Artemis III late 2027 rendezvous target at serious risk. A clean Pad 2 performance confirms that the dual pad infrastructure that the bi-weekly launch cadence depends on is operational. Here is the verdict. Structured, because the question deserves a structured answer. What Flight 12 saves if it succeeds, it saves the program from losing another quarter. 321 days have passed since Starship Flight 11 in October 2025. Every day of the gap is a day that SpaceX is not producing flight data for the HLS certification process. A successful Flight 12 ends that gap. It produces propellant transfer hardware flight data for the first time. It validates V3 booster performance. It validates Pad 2. It triggers Ship 40's testing campaign from an earlier position of confidence rather than continued uncertainty. It gives Tom Percy and the NASA HLS team real data to cite when they next appear before Congress and are asked whether Starship HLS will be ready for late 2027 Artemis III rendezvous. What Flight 12 does not save. It does not demonstrate orbital propellant transfer. It does not complete the critical design review. It does not answer whether the 10 or more tanker flights required to fuel a Starship HLS for a lunar departure can be executed reliably without excessive boil-off losses on a timeline that supports a 2028 crewed lunar landing. It does not certify the HLS variant of Starship for human operations. None of those things happen on May 19th. All of them must happen before any astronaut boards a Starship for the moon. The Wikipedia article on Starship HLS, updated as of March 2026, states plainly that neither the ship-to-ship propellant transfer demonstration nor the design certification review had occurred as of that date. The GAO's list of delayed milestones from 2023, 8 out of 13 key program events delayed by at least 6 months, has not been publicly updated with a current status. What is known from Isaac Mann's April 27th testimony before the House Appropriations Committee is that both SpaceX and Blue Origin confirmed they could meet the late 2027 Artemis III Earth orbit rendezvous. Not the lunar landing, not the full HLS certification, the rendezvous and docking in low Earth orbit. That is the bar that both landers have been asked to clear in the near term. And clearing it means, at minimum, launching a Starship in a configuration that can rendezvous with Orion in Earth orbit, dock successfully, and operate its life support and communication systems for the duration of the test. Flight 12 is not that vehicle. Starship HLS is a specific variant that has not yet been built and flown. Flight 12 is the test flight that helps build toward it. The Isaac Mann quotation from a Bloomberg podcast is the most detailed public description of what the Artemis III sequence actually looks like. He said, "You're going to see 3 distinct and the most powerful rockets in the world launch in quick succession. SLS, which launches Orion and the crew. New Glenn, which puts Blue Origin's Blue Moon into low Earth orbit, and Starship, which puts the Starship HLS into low Earth orbit. 3 separate launches, 3 separate vehicles, all within a short enough window that all 3 spacecraft can be in compatible orbits simultaneously for rendezvous and docking operations. That is an operationally complex scenario that has never been attempted. The coordination required between NASA, SpaceX, and Blue Origin across 3 different launch providers in 3 different regulatory environments, with 3 different spacecraft in orbit simultaneously, is itself a novel challenge. For SpaceX's Starship to participate in that scenario in late 2027, it needs to be not just an operational launch vehicle, but a vehicle that NASA is confident can rendezvous and dock with Orion safely. That confidence comes from the HLS certification process. That certification process requires the orbital refueling demonstration to have completed. That demonstration requires multiple successful V3 orbital flights. Those orbital flights depend on Flight 12 succeeding first. The chain of dependencies runs forward from Monday. The 2028 crewed lunar landing is at the end of that chain. Flight 12 is the next link. Is that enough? Is one suborbital flight on May 19th enough to save a program that has missed every deadline it has set for itself since 2024? By itself? No. By what it enables? Possibly yes, if the next links in the chain go faster than the previous links have gone. The November 2025 internal SpaceX timeline that Politico reported targeted June 2026 for orbital refueling and June 2027 for an uncrewed lunar landing. The June 2026 target is probably out of reach given where the program stands right now, but the underlying ambition, completing orbital refueling by late 2026 or early 2027, having a Starship HLS vehicle ready for Artemis III in late 2027, is not unreachable if Flight 12 succeeds, Flight 13 achieves orbital insertion within a few months, and the propellant transfer demonstrations then proceed at the biweekly cadence SpaceX has targeted. The margin is narrow. The NASA OIG audit published in March 2026 identified propellant management during transfer, long-duration cryogenic storage in orbit, and the sheer complexity of coordinating 10 or more tanker flights as significant unresolved technical risks. These risks are real. They are documented by independent auditors, and they remain unresolved on the eve of Flight 12. What changes on May 19th is that SpaceX stops standing at the entrance to the critical path and starts walking down it. Flight 12 does not save the moon mission. It begins the work of saving it. Whether there is enough runway left between the launch on Monday and the late 2027 deadline for Artemis III to close the gap that has been accumulating since 2023 is a question that 10 flights, a propellant transfer demonstration, and a critical design review will need to answer. Flight 12 is the first of those 10. The launch window opens at 5:30 p.m. Central on Monday. The answer begins arriving then. There is one more element to this picture that rarely features in the Flight 12 preview coverage: Blue Origin. Because the question of whether Flight 12 saves SpaceX's moon mission implicitly assumes that SpaceX's moon mission is the only one that matters for Artemis. It is not. NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman described the upcoming Artemis III as 3 powerful rockets launching in quick succession: SLS, New Glenn with Blue Moon, and Starship HLS. Blue Origin's Blue Moon Mark II. Crew cabin mock-up arrived at NASA's Johnson Space Center on May 7, 2026, the same week SpaceX completed its static fire. Blue Origin's Mark I cargo lander called Endurance has completed thermal vacuum testing and is at Kennedy Space Center preparing for its own demonstration mission later in 2026. If Blue Origin's development pace stays ahead of SpaceX's HLS certification process, the 2027 Artemis III rendezvous may rely more heavily on Blue Moon than on Starship HLS. NASA has not finalized whether it would dock with one or both HLS vehicles, with decisions dependent in part on development progress and launch cadence. Dependent on development progress. That phrase means exactly what it sounds like. The lander that demonstrates more readiness gets more mission. Flight 12 is therefore not just a test of V3's hardware. It is a competitive signal in a 2-lander race where the prize is the primary role in the first crewed lunar landing since Apollo 17. SpaceX has the more capable vehicle on paper, Starship's payload. Capacity and long-term reusability dwarf Blue Moon's specification. But Blue Moon's dedicated lunar lander design, without the orbital refueling complexity that Starship HLS requires, may prove faster to certify. Hardware that lands first wins the mission. And right now, the hardware that is further along the certification checklist is the one being trained on at Johnson Space Center, not the one preparing to fly from Pad 2 on Monday. Flight 12 matters for SpaceX's moon mission. It also matters for SpaceX's position in the race with the company that was given the second HLS contract specifically to create competitive pressure on SpaceX to deliver. The race is real, the timeline is real, and Monday is where SpaceX's answer begins. The NASA OIG, the Office of Inspector General, published an audit in March 2026 specifically on the management of the Human Landing System contracts. Its findings on risk were unambiguous. The audit identified propellant management during transfer as a significant unresolved challenge because cryogenic propellants boil off at rates that depend on tank insulation, connection hardware temperature, and transfer flow rate, variables that can only be precisely characterized by actually doing the transfer in orbit. It identified long-duration cryogenic storage in orbit as another unresolved issue because Starlink HLS may need to wait in orbit for weeks while tanker missions are being staged, and how much propellant is lost to boil off during that wait determines how many tanker flights are required. The audit identified coordination of 10 or more tanker flights as operationally complex in ways that ground simulations cannot fully validate. These are the risks that remain after 11 test flights and 30-plus HLS-specific milestones completed. They are not small risks. They are the 3 most consequential technical unknowns in the Artemis timeline. Flight 12 does not resolve any of them directly, but Flight 12 begins the flight campaign that will produce the data needed to resolve them. The orbital refueling demonstration that Percy and the NASA HLS team are waiting for cannot happen until V3 has at least one orbital flight under its belt. That orbital flight is Flight 13. Flight 13 cannot be designed with full confidence until Flight 12's data exists. Everything in the chain depends on what happens Monday. Not because Monday answers the big questions, because Monday is the prerequisite for everything that answers the big questions. Will Flight 12 save SpaceX's moon mission? It is the wrong question. The right question is whether Flight 12 starts saving it. And the I answer to that is yes, if it succeeds. The launch window opens at 5:30 p.m. Central on May 19th. The rest follows from there.